on your phones, if you can turn to Surah Al-Hashr, chapter number 59 of the Quran. Surah Al-Hashr, chapter number 59 of the Quran, verse number 7. Inshallah, we will be looking at verses 7 to 9 this evening, inshallah. All of our marhumin, and especially marhum Shaykh Ladak, let us recite a Surah Al-Fatiha. All of the shuhada that have died defending the holy shrines and sanctuaries of Karbala, of Najaf, of Damascus, of Samarra and of Qadimiyya, let us recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for the witness. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيد الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم وما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتهوا واتقوا الله إن الله شديد العقاب. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, and I respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our discussions under the title of Living for Islam Today. Last night we talked about what is known as the Maqasid al-Sharia. We stated that the Maqasid al-Sharia are the ultimate goals of what the Sharia hopes to achieve. Sharia is different to fiqh. Sharia is the law which is divine in the knowledge of God, and therefore it is absolutely perfect. Fiqh is the human interpretation of that divine law, and therefore, because it is human and not ma'soom, therefore there will always be a difference between the Sharia and the fiqh. Therefore, our first duty is to try to understand the Sharia itself. What does the Sharia want to achieve? What does it hope to be able to implement? And therefore, once we get to know that, we know whether our fiqh is in line with the Sharia or not. Because if I, for example, or you, for example, make a law which is not in accordance with the goal of the Sharia, then I know that I am not in keeping, or my life is not in keeping with the Sharia itself. Stated that there is the deen and there is the Sharia. The deen, the religion of Allah, is there to take people out of darkness and into light. مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. And Sharia is divided into three: your aqaid, your theology; your akhlaq, mannerisms and characteristics, and then there is the ahkam, which is the laws, which we call fiqh. And the ultimate aim of all these three things collectively is, according to the Quran, وَيَدَعُ عَنْهُمْ إِسْرَهُمْ وَأَغْلَالَ الَّتِي كَانَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ, that it lifts the burdens of society and breaks the shackles that are on society. Anything that stops you from achieving the fullness of your human potential, either individually or collectively, is against Sharia. Because the goal of the Sharia is to help you break those shackles. And immediately we realize whether my life is in keeping with that, whether the community is in keeping with that, whether the way in which I'm practicing my Islam is in keeping with that ultimate goal of the Sharia itself. Then we stated, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says within the Holy Quran, شَرَعَ لَكُمْ مِنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحٌ وَإِبْرَاهِيمُ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. That the Sharia is primarily two things. All the prophets who have come with Sharia have aimed to do two things: to establish the deen, the righteous way of living, and not to create division therein. For human beings to learn to live together in peace and in harmony. Then we mentioned the hadith of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he says, La khayru fil watan, there is no value to living in a place illa ma'al amni was surur, unless you're going to have security and spiritual happiness. This means that when the Sharia legislates what its goals are, it takes it from these sorts of hadith. It says the goal of the overriding system of living is to give you amana, safety and sanctuary, to give you surur, to give you a spiritual happiness and blessing where you're living. If where you're living, or the government, or the system of living is not yielding you safety, then the system is wrong, because it is in opposition to the goal of the Sharia, and so on and so forth. Now there are many goals of the Sharia, and we don't have time to go through all of them, but just to give you an example, Sharia wishes to protect your rights. Sharia wishes to protect your human dignity and honor. Sharia wishes to give you evolution in your life so that you are growing. And anything that is in opposition to this cannot really yield from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if I say it's Islam, even if I say this is what God wants, because it's in contradiction to the maqasid, it's not really from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter how much I claim it to be. Now this evening, inshallah, our topic is to look at one of the maqasid. There are many. One of them is that man should live in honor and in dignity. And in order to understand one of the prime reasons why man does not live in honor and dignity is because of poverty. And so this evening, inshallah, our topic is to assess why poverty happens. What are the different leading theories of how to uplift us from poverty, both within the Islamic ideology and within non-Muslim circles as well. We want to understand what is the Islamic understanding of ownership. We want to understand how best to be able to utilize our money, because poverty is one of the great reasons as to why humankind does not live with dignity. In the world, we have places which are slum cities, or areas which are slums, areas which people cannot bathe properly or eat properly. Disease, crime is rampant in those areas. Is this living with human dignity, or is this not living with dignity? Within our own communities, there may be people who are living in poverty. How do we help them come out of poverty in light of what Islam wants us to be able to live by. The reality is that 1/4 of the world lives in extreme poverty. According to the United Nations, the definition of extreme poverty is living with less than $2 a day to be able to spend on everything. Not $2 as in American money, but the equivalent in your own country. That everything you need, your food, your shelter, your electricity, your clothing, your transport, everything, all you have to live on for all of that is $2 a day. 2 billion people in the world live on less than $2 a day. 1/3 of humanity every year dies because of poverty-related problems. This is an unbefitting state of humanity, especially when there is such grand wealth in the world today. And so our discussion this evening is to firstly look at the maqsad, the goal of Sharia, which is for human beings to live in a state of honor and to live in a state of dignity, and then to look at the way in which poverty is created, and then the way in which Islam and other sources tell us we can eradicate poverty, inshaAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, in chapter number 17, Surah Al-Isra, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He has honored children of Prophet Adam alayhi salam. Our honor comes from being the best of creation. And our being the best of creation comes from the aql that we have been given, the rationality that we have been given. By virtue of us being aql, we are the one creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has dominion over our own world. We organize ourselves in such a way that no other creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala organizes itself. And not only that, we are the one creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that seeks to expand over its own dominion in the way in which we do. We needed to cross the seas, and so we created the boats to do so. We wanted to traverse in the air, and so we created the planes to be able to do so. We wanted to explore the entirety of the world and the universe. We created rockets to get to the moon, and now even further afield. This is what human being is capable of. Every time a problem is put in front of us, when we want to, when we truly want to, we are able to completely block and destroy all of those challenges that are present in front of us. Can you imagine sitting with those cavemen, or sitting with the companions of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and saying, we will walk on the moon. We will build these great cities, so many skyscrapers into the sky. Just look at New York or Dubai and the beauty of what we have created. Yet, somehow, we have not managed to eradicate the very most basic thing within society, to stop people living in a state of desperation. Now, because we are honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with that honor comes certain human rights. We don't have time to go into the human rights system that is created in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. But what we want to mention is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated 4 basic human rights for mankind within the Holy Quran. In chapter number 20, Surah Taha, verses 113 to 120, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the story of Prophet Adam alayhi salam. He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا Iblis, Abba. When we told to the angels prostrate in honor of Adam, they made prostration. All except Iblis. فَقُلْنَا يَا آدَمْ إِنَّ هَذَا عَدُوٌ لَكَ. O Adam, this Iblis is an enemy to you, وَلِزَوْجِكَ, and to your wife. فَلَا يُخْرِجَنَّكُمَا مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ فَتَشْقَى. And do not allow him to drive you out of the garden, lest you live in a state of unhappiness and difficulty. But now you're going to leave, you're going to end up doing what you're going to do, and as you exit this garden, now I'm going to give you certain rights that I want mankind to live by. إِنَّ لَكَ أَنْ لَا تَجُوعَ فِيهَا وَلَا تَعْرَى وَأَنَّكَ لَا تَذْمَأُ فِيهَا وَلَا تَضْحَى. Surely it is ordained by God that you should not be bare of clothing, and you should not go hungry, and you should not be bare of clothing, and you should not go thirsty, nor should you live without shelter under the heat of the sun. Mankind, in the view of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has 4 basic human rights. You should not go hungry, you should not go without clothing, you should cover yourself, you should not go in extreme thirst, and you should not be without shelter. These are your rights as human beings. Do we find those rights being implemented in the world today? No. And so immediately we can see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constructed His view of how the world should be versus the way in which we end up living, and how billions of people end up living in absolute poverty or without basic human rights. Now, poverty is something that is not accidental. It's not just because, we have come to this way by accident and it just happens to be this way. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for people to live in such a state of destitution. This is very important. Poverty is absolutely man-made. Poverty is as a result of the structures that we as mankind have chosen to live by. And as a result of those constructions from human mind, from envy, jealousy and greed and exploitation, we as a human collective end up living in this state of poverty that we do. This is very important. You know why? Because so many times, especially atheists, will say, if there is a God, why does He allow such extreme poverty to be there? The answer is simple. It's not the choice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has given me and you freedom. And as a result, we decide how we construct our social systems. If we as a collective society decide this will be our philosophy, this will be our state of living, this is how the government will be, then we cannot blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is upon us to decide whether we live in poverty or we don't live in poverty. I have a knife, I can kill, or I can cut bread and feed the homeless. Does Allah decide whether I stab someone? Does Allah decide whether I feed the homeless? I am at will to decide whether I do what I do with the knife. Therefore, collectively, we decide how we wish to live and govern ourselves, whether we are in accordance with goodness and justice, or whether we are in opposition to goodness and justice. All of these things are constructed in a certain way to allow certain parts of the world to be enriched and certain parts of the world to be more enslaved into poverty. Here, especially in this country, it should be absolutely known the way in which the British created poverty. This country, at one point, had 23%, 1/4 of the world's produce. 1/4 of the world's GDP. When Britain left it, this country produced 0.2% of the world's GDP. Is that by accident? Or was this country decimated by certain ideas? You will decide for yourself, and the people at home will decide for themselves. These systems are rampant in the world today. I'll give you a couple of examples for you to think about. I was talking to my host, and my host kindly asked me, "What do you want for breakfast?" And I said, "Cereal." And he wasn't sure what cereal was. So I'm asking, do you know what cereal is? Cornflakes. Yes? In England we call it cereal. Cornflakes. And he said, "Which kind of cornflakes do you want? There's so many." Now think about this very carefully. How many types of cornflakes are there? You know, there was a study done. Collectively in the world, there are about 4,000 different cereals and cornflakes in the world. Just flavors of one type of food. More than 4,000 you can buy across the world. Chocolate, honey, strawberry, this, that, this picture. It's got a picture of a vampire on the front. It's got a picture of a tiger on the front, right? 4,000 different types of cornflakes. You know when you go into those shops, those large shops, and they have the shelves of all the different types of food? You go in and there's that section for cornflakes, isn't there? You've seen, all of you. You walk in, how many different types are there for you to be able to buy? It's at least dozens, if not hundreds, correct? I'm asking a simple question, brothers and sisters. How can you have 4,000 types of cornflakes in the world, yet people starve to death in poverty? There's an imbalance, isn't there? Now that's one type of food, just one type, which is cornflakes, cereal. What are all the other types of food that exist in the world? Fish, tinned goods, breads, jams, everything collectively. There is such an abundance in this world, yet people in parts of Africa, people in Yemen right now are starving to death. Or I don't even have to go far. There are parts even here in this part of the world that is in desperate state looking for food. I'm asking a simple question, brothers and sisters. Is this God-made or is this man-made? It has to be man-made. Because the system we are using is that there is so much excessiveness in one area, it means that there's going to be a depletion in the other area. You know, those of you who study even basic economics, you know there is supply and demand. Do you know there are certain countries that they produce so much of certain foodstuffs in order to keep the price high for demand, they actually dump food into the oceans. Because if there's enough food, then they can't charge so much for it. The United States of America historically has dumped millions of tons of wheat into the oceans just so that the price remains high. Just think about these things, brothers and sisters. Now, have a look at what the Quran says and the principles of the attitude that we are supposed to take in making sure that human beings live with dignity and honor, which are four. People should not go hungry. People should not go bare of clothing. People should not live thirsty. And people should not live without shelter. Turn now in the Quran to Surah Al-Hashr, please, chapter number 59 of the Holy Quran, verses number 7 to 10. We will read them very quickly because they should be quite self-evident. But it begins to show the thinking of Islam and certain structures that we will return back to in our talk, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, whatever Allah has restored to His apostle from the people of the towns, Mecca and Medina, it is for Allah and the apostle and for the near of kin and the orphans and the needy and the wayfarer. Now, this next part is the important part. about one of the things we will return back to. Allah says, كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دَوْلَةً بَيْنَ أَغْنِيَاء مِنْكُمْ, so that wealth does not just remain amongst the rich folks. This is an Islamic principle that we will return back to. Wealth is not supposed to just remain amongst the rich. We'll come to it. Next verse, number 8. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. لِلْفُقَرَاءِ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ الَّذِينَ أُخْرِجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ وَأَمْوَالِهِمْ يَبْتَغُونَ فَضْلًا مِنَ اللَّهِ وَرِضْوَانَهُ وَيَنْصُرُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الصَّادِقُونَ. Wealth, it is for the poor people who have had to flee their houses, those who have been driven away from their homes and had their possessions taken away from them, those people seeking the grace of Allah and His pleasure, assisting Allah and His Apostle. Those who give, they actually assist Allah. Assalamu alaikum ya ansar ad-dinillah. Can you imagine, does Allah need help? No. He says there are those people who will help Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll come back to this as well, inshaAllah. Next verse, number 9. And those who make their abode in the city, those muhajireen that went and lived in Medina, and in the faith before them, love those who have fled to them. The Ansar love the muhajireen, and they do not find in their hearts a need for that which they are given. The beauty of the Ansar is that even though they had or didn't have much, they decided to give it to the muhajireen. What does it say? They prefer the others before they even prefer themselves. The Ansar used to give to the muhajireen, even though the Ansar themselves were in need. Though poverty may afflict them, and whoever is preserved from being bukhul, from being stingy from his soul, he is surely the successful one. Okay, we'll come back to some of these verses inshaAllah, and we need to talk about some of these things. Now, the first thing for us to be able to state is that poverty is man-made. The hadith of the sixth Imam, Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, says the following: إنما وضعت الزكاة اختبارا للأغنياء ومعونة للفقراء. Most surely, zakat here doesn't just mean literally 2.5% of the wealth on certain things. It means your purification of your wealth. Zakat has been placed as a test upon the rich and as a means to assist the poor. Listen to this line. وَلَوْ أَنَّ النَّاسَ أَدُّوا زَكَاةَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ مَا بَقِيَ مُسْلِمٌ فَقِيرًا مُحْتَاجًا. Had people given from their wealth as they were supposed to, there would not remain a single Muslim who is poor or in need. Had people given properly as they were supposed to, no one would remain poor. إِنَّ النَّاسَ مَا اِفْتَقَرُوا وَلَا اِحْتَاجُوا وَلَا جَاعُوا إِلَّا بِذُنُوبِ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ. People are only enslaved into poverty and in desperation and in hunger because of the sins of the rich people. It's the hadith of the Imam. The only reason why there is poverty and hunger is because of the sin of the rich person. The hadith concludes, it says, Allah's rahmah is stopped to the person who He stops his wealth from being used for the rights of the people who need it. Allah's rahmah will not reach the person who does not use his responsibility of his wealth in the right way. This is the hadith of Imam alayhi salam. Now, what we wish to do inshaAllah now is ask the next three questions. Number one, we want to ask ourselves, how does Islam see the system of ownership and the relationship between ownership and basic human needs? Number one. Number two, we want to ask, what are the principles that is expected for people to be able to live by when it comes to their wealth? What are the principles when it comes to distribution of money, and when you earn something and when you gain something for yourself? What are the Islamic ways to lift people out of poverty, and what are the ways that non-Muslims are suggesting for people to be lifted out of poverty? And through these points, we want us to be able to implement them locally within our own communities, locally within our own countries, and globally where possible. Brothers and sisters, especially my youth, you tomorrow will be the authors of the future. You will go to university. You will study economics. You will study business. You will study management. You will study global trade and finance. It is not for the Muslim. It is not for the Muslim to just participate in these institutions which foster and engender global poverty. You and I are to write, research, create institutions that will bring about change so that the Sharia is actually being implemented. We don't mean fiqh. Sharia, the goals of the Sharia to lift people out of poverty and to give people honor and dignity as the human being is supposed to be living in. Question one, ownership. And specifically ownership when it comes to the needs of mankind. In economics, we know that there is a term which is called utilities. Have you come across this term? Utilities. Utilities, although definitions differ, utilities are those things which people need as their basics to be able to live at a normal standard of living. Now, look at what this verse said. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that mankind should not live in hunger, without clothes, thirsty, or without shelter. The first basic concept of global living, according to Islam, is that there should be what is known as a universal basic standard of living. This is very important. Standards are so wide. You will have someone living in a slum having to bathe in sewage water. You will have someone who lives in such wealth that only 3 years ago the most expensive apartment in the world was sold in New York for $100 million. Just the apartment overlooking the Central Park. You know, the owner of that apartment didn't even want to live there. He just bought it because in 5 years' time it will go up in cost, so he didn't want to pay more. The first time it was broken, the $100 million mark for an apartment. Islam says that there is a universal basic standard of living that must be implemented across the world. And that is for people to be in a state where they have access to food, access to clean water, access to proper clothing, and access to basic proper shelter. Number one. Number two, based upon these needs, you have utilities. Utilities are things like water, gas, electricity, and so on and so forth. In certain countries, they also consider utilities to be things like the postal service. So it differentiates based on place to place. According to Islam, utilities are not permitted to be owned privately for the exploitation of humankind. Let me give you a very simple example. And we're going to talk about water tomorrow night in detail. I'm going to just give you the example of water. Water is a human right, yes or no? Yes? Are you sure? Did you know, according to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, when it was first written, water was not considered a human right? Do you know why? Because companies said we should be able to own water and sell it at a profit. Food, basic human food, is not permitted to be sold at a profit whereby a human being cannot afford it. Water is not allowed to be owned in a way in which it is sold at a cost that a human being cannot afford it properly. Shaykh Jaffer Ladak, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, in his book Our Economics, writes this. He says, if water is found, you are the custodian of the water, not the owner of the water. When Imam al-Hussein, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, reached the banks of the river Euphrates, and he fed water to the animals, and he fed water to the horses, and he fed water to the army of Yazid, why didn't he say, I first found this, I own this? He couldn't say it. Water is for everyone. Food is for everyone. Basic clothing is for everyone. Basic shelter is for everyone. Therefore, ownership of these things is not to be exploited. The cost is factored in. And the need to be able to make water clean, to be able to make piping, to be able to make everything has to be factored into the cost and then sold, but not sold at a cost where a human being is unable to afford it. Now, what you end up finding is that countries block off these foods, block off these waters, and say, we own this. Therefore, we now distribute this, depending on how much we decide to sell it. Let me ask you a question. The oil that is found underneath Arabia today, which is occupied by Al Saud illegally, this dastardly family that lives there claiming that they are the custodians, is that oil for humankind, or is that oil for Al Saud to decide what they do with it? Which one? It's for humankind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave gas, gave oil, gave water, gave cotton for humankind to be able to use, not for a country and not for a company to commoditize and then exploit it from one person to another. This is the first. Now, because today we have to have, according to Islam, a universal basic standard of living, by rights we also need to have a universal basic standard of income as well, whereby everyone is lifted out of poverty because they need access to this global market to be able to buy and sell. Because there are things that come from one place and another. Everything that we buy and sell is from all across the world. Therefore, you need to have access to have things across the world. Therefore, you also need universal basic income. Now, this is very interesting. And there are certain tests that have been done by financial institutions, by academic studies on a universal basic income. I'll give you an example. In London a few years ago, there was a study that was done. They took 13 homeless people, random homeless people, and gave them each, no strings attached, £3,000. And said, you can do what you want, no strings attached. We're just going to document what you do with it. Now, the cost of looking after those people was huge, because with all this poverty comes bad health. With poverty comes a broken family. With bad health comes crime, and so on and so forth. And so the government of Britain, in order just to look after all the potential need of these 13 homeless people, ran into the hundreds of the thousands. Hospital care, doctors, shelters, security, policing, and so on and so forth. Financial institutions said, we're going to give you £3,000, no conditions. Do what you want with it. After 1 year, they found 7 of them were now living in proper housing. 10 of them had jobs. Only 2 of them had not spent all of their money and had £800 left. They had chosen that they wanted to remain on the streets. Of their 3,000, they spent 2,200, they had 800 remaining. The majority of them used that money to go and buy clothing, write a CV, rent a house, find work, and put themselves back on their feet. We end up thinking, if I give money to someone, he's just going to spend it on drugs, alcohol, gambling, he's going to waste it. Human dignity says human beings will want to look after themselves. Human beings will want to look after their family. A human being doesn't want to be on welfare. A human being wants to be in a state where he looks after his own soul. And a basic income across the world says that every human being must be given a basic right, because that will give them the means to be able to live on. You know who came up with this idea first? Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib sallallahu According to the hadith, it says that when he was in charge of Bayt al-Mal, anyone who came with a need, he wrote for them a basic amount from Bayt al-Mal. A basic amount came from Bayt al-Mal. But then if you needed more because you had more children, because you had greater need, he might give to you more. Might give to you based upon your actual circumstances. Do you remember that famous story when his own brother comes to him and says to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I am in need. With that candle, comes and takes his hand and he burns his hand. He says, my brother, why are you trying to burn my hand? He says, no, why are you trying to burn my hand? If I give you more than what you need, then you will be putting me into the fire of hell. Your amount is written for you. Your basic need has been covered. So long as there are other people in need, I cannot distribute to you more whilst other people have a basic amount that is also needed from them. Islam says humans must be living in dignity. You have a basic right to standards of living and arguably a human amount of way in which we must have a basic income so that we are lifted out of degradation and poverty. Now, there are lots of different ideas, and we won't have time to go into all of them, but we will conclude the discussion tomorrow on all the different ways of dealing with poverty. I want to mention 1 or 2 ideas, inshallah, we continue tomorrow. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala see that we should be using our finances and using our wealth? According to Islam, once we have met our needs, everything that is above that is now the right of another human being. If you earn, and I'm just picking a figure, 2,000, your needs are 1,000. It is the right of someone else that they are given that 1,000 extra and above. What we have come to think about through capitalism is that with this extra 1,000, I will buy more than what I need. As soon as I earn more, I must buy a bigger car, a more expensive car. The moment I earn more, I have to buy a better house. Even though I don't need it, I'll buy the better house, which is more extravagant than what I actually need. Once you have met your needs, if there is someone else who is in need, that right is placed upon you to distribute to that person. I want to show you a phenomenal verse of Quran, a very scary verse of Quran, about economic principles in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter number 9 of the Holy Quran, Surah At-Tawbah, verse number 34. Chapter number 9, verse number 34. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, O you who believe, Most surely many of the doctors of law and monks, ulama, of all faiths, Christian, Jew, Muslim, ulama, he calls them al-ahbar wal-ruhban. What do? They eat away the property of people falsely. It's a warning to ulama of every faith. Then he says, وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ. Those people who hoard gold and silver, وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ وَلَا يُنْفِقُونَهَا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Those people who hoard away gold and silver and do not spend upon those people who need it, announce to them, give them tidings of adabun alim. If we hoard money and we hoard our wealth, so those people who need it, tell them that there is a painful chastisement for those people. The moment you and I earn, whatever our needs are, even if it's nice comforts, finish your needs. But the additional is the right of someone else who doesn't have. And if we don't do this, there is a painful chastisement for those people who are stingy and hoard up that which is the huquq of other people within the world. As a result of this, there are many ideas in Islamic and non-Islamic thought about how to be able to lift people out of poverty. The first one I want to mention is what is known as microfinancing. You heard of microfinancing? Some people? Microfinancing is very simplistic. It means to create a microeconomy for certain people. A very small economy for people. You know that famous saying, don't give someone a fish, give them a rod and teach them how to fish. This is microfinancing. The idea is that you invest into someone and you buy them something that will give them self-sufficiency. It happens across the world, I'm sure you all know. Sometimes you give someone some farmland, sometimes you give someone some animals, sometimes you give someone a sewing machine, sometimes you give someone some cloth, sometimes you give someone a computer and courses so that they learn to do something, they make a business for themselves. The idea is microfinancing. Again, do you know who was one of the first in Islam to start microfinancing? Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. There is an amazing story. I'm sure everybody here, inshallah, knows of Marhum Mullah Asghar. Yes? Everybody knows Marhum Mullah Asghar, inshallah. If you don't, one of the, if not the leading alim of the Khoja community in his life, may Allah bless him and have mercy on him. This story was told to me by his son, Shaykh Jaffer. Many people also will know Shaykh Jaffer. So inshallah, it's a reliable sanad, chain of narration. Marhum al-Asghar tells Shaykh Abbas tells me, and I hope I'm thiqah, trustworthy enough to convey this to you. Shaykh Abbas told us, says, my father told me, I only saw Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam once in my life, in my dreams. He says, after the martyrdom of Sayyidah Zahra salawatullah wa salamuhu alayha, as you know, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam declined to assist the illegitimate usurpers and government of the time. Even the companions did, as you know. Bilal al-Habashi refused to recite Adhan and left the city in order to say, I don't even want to recite Adhan lest it be seen as a tacit endorsement of the leadership. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam reclused himself away from these people for a few years, and he only went out to assist them when they were about to make grave mistakes and help them in bringing the community back to the right path. According to our hadith, do you know what Amir al-Mu'mineen spent his time doing? He would spend his time digging and planting and gifting what he found to widows, to orphans, to fuqara, and to slaves, in order to emancipate them from their poverty and give them self-sufficiency. Marhum al-Azhar saw this in his dream. He says, I saw Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam after the wafat of Zahra alayhi salam, and he was digging wells, planting orchards, have dates, fruits to be able to distribute. He would be digging wells. And in the dream, he would dig, and he was hot, and he was sweating, and it was hard work, labor for him to be able to do. Marhum al-Azhar says that during the dream, he dug, and all of a sudden, he struck water. When Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam struck water in the dream, he shouted out, Allahu Akbar. Praising whom? Not himself. Amir al-Mu'mineen never praises himself. When something is done, he praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu Akbar. As the water is struck, making a stream, he looks up and looks straight into the face of Marhum al-Azhar in the dream and smiles, a satisfied smile, saying, this will be what I end up giving to someone as custodian over in order to give them self-sufficiency. Amir al-Mu'mineen used to plant orchards, date trees, businesses, and give it to the poor and the needy. This is known as what is? Microfinance, lifting people out of poverty. Our time comes to an end, and tomorrow we will continue, inshallah, talking about 3 other ways in which Islam and leading economists talk about uplifting people from poverty. And we will in particular talk about one gentleman from South India, in fact, who has created a revolutionary idea that is being used today. And that all of you, inshallah, as business owners, will utilize his idea. Again, you will find these things within Islamic ideology. Brothers and sisters, just to wrap up what we have said and to remind ourselves, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His Sharia has created maqasid, goals. One of the maqsad, the goals, is for human beings to live in honor and to live with dignity. Poverty takes away dignity from mankind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that these are human rights. Humans not to have to live in a state of poverty, without food, without clothing, without shelter, without access to food. Therefore, our responsibility is to help lift people as much as we can out of poverty in a truly Islamic manner. Those who hoard wealth, that will be something that they will eat as fire on the Day of Judgment. Those people who take away the hukuk of mankind, Allah will take away rahmah from those individuals. And so, inshallah, tomorrow we will return back to these verses of Surah Al-Hashr, and then return to our 3 last ways in which Islam talks about lifting people from poverty. Between the 26th and 28th of Dhul Hijjah, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam met one of the commanders of the army of Yazid by the name of Khoja ibn Yazid al-Riyah. Imam alayhi salam gave his battalion water and said to them, drink as much as you want. Fill your flasks, especially to his own army, because in the coming days, the access to the water would be cut off from them. As the Imam tries to depart on his way, Khoja, with his battalion of 1,000 people, grabs the reins of the horse of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, stops him. Imam says to him, may your mother weep over you, Khoja. Khoja responds and says, had your mother been anyone other than Fatima al-Zahra, I would have been able to have said the same thing to you. But because you are the daughter of Sayyidatin Nisa'il Alameen, I am unable to be able to do this. Imam arrives in the fields of Karbala. He purchases the land and he sets up his army. By the time the night of Ashura comes, there are 30,000 swords baying for the blood of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. But on that night, and on that day of Ashura, horror is awakening in his soul. He cannot bear what he is hearing from the tents of Imam al-Hussein. Think about this, brothers and sisters. What awoke horror? The calls and the cries of hunger and thirst. We have spent the last hour talking about people who are hungry and thirsty. But when I walk the streets, I don't have any rahmah for the one who is hungry or thirsty. I don't find myself giving in charity or in aid or finding some way to be able to lift people out of poverty. Their cries around the world doesn't affect me. The cry of those people in Sudan doesn't hurt me. The cry of those in Yemen doesn't affect me. The cry of those people in my own city doesn't affect me. That is why I wasn't Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyah. That is why Allah made me me and didn't place me amongst the shuhada on the 10th of Muharram. Because I'm not worthy to be amongst those people on the 10th. But the cries of the daughters and the sons of Rasulullah hurt Hur so much that he couldn't bear to hear the cries from Sakina saying, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. Oh Abbas, the thirst kills me. Oh my uncle Abbas, you are the protector. You are the standard bearer. You are the one who guarantees the safety of us. I am Sakina. I am the one who looks after the children. It is my responsibility to look after Imam al-Baqir. It is my responsibility to look after Fatima al-Sughra. It is my responsibility to look after my baby brother Asghar. I cannot bear it, please. Abbas, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. When these cries reached the tents of the army of Yazid, the majority of the army of Yazid felt no pain in their heart. The dogs and the pigs can drink from the banks of the river Euphrates, but Asghar cannot drink from the bank of the river Euphrates. On the afternoon of the 10th of Muharram, in the tent of Hur, Hur is pacing up and down. The soldiers around him, his generals and leaders around him, his son and his servants, they looked at him and said, "Oh Hur, you are the bravest of all of us. We have never seen you in such a state before the battle. What is wrong with you?" He says, "I stand here between heaven and hell. It is as if right now that I have a choice. My heart is paining at what I have done. I have taken the daughters and the sons of Fatima to a state where they have no water, where I have led Hussein to a point of death. How will I stand on the day of judgment before Allah?" According to some khutbah, the speakers, they tell us that at this point, Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi tells his son and his servant, "I want you to bind my hand in such a way that as if I am a captive or a servant. and I want you to take me towards Hussein ibn Ali. The decision has been made. They tie him, or they take him in a state in which he has such humility. The army is saying, where is Har going? Is Har going because he wants to start the war? Is Har going to bring peace? Is Har going to fight against? Har is not listening to any of their words. His vision is upon helping Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. His son and his servant take Har, and he arrives outside. He says, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says to his leaders, he says to Abbas, he says towards Habib, there is a guest who is approaching. Listen to these words. There is a guest who is approaching. Go out and receive him. When a guest comes to your house, do you not give them something to drink? Do you not give them something to eat? What does Hussein have to offer him? All Hussein can offer him is the truth and a pathway towards Jannah. Go and welcome our guest. Har enters. He throws himself at the feet of Abu Abdullah. He says, Halli min tawbah? Is there any way that my tawbah can be accepted? Is there any way for my tawbah, for my repentance to be accepted before you? Do you know what the Imam says? Tallahi, I swear by Allah, your repentance has been accepted. You are free now. Har says, this is not enough. How will I stand in front of Fatima on the day of judgment if I leave you to die? I wish to be the first to go out and defend you. According to some khutaba, we are told that Har tells now, take a message towards Sayyidah Zainab, because I want my forgiveness, not just from you, O Imam, but I also have to get forgiveness from Zainab. If Zainab forgives me, I know Fatima forgives me. If Fatima forgives me, I know everything is okay. In this state, Har now commands his son, you should go and be the first to go and give your life. My servant, you are free. I free you, go. The servant says, you will now leave me? You will now free me and not allow me to go and die for Hussein? He even goes and dies for Hussein. And then comes out Har and the Yazid al-Riyahi fighting. They call out to him and say, oh Har, what have you done? Do you really want to submit now to death? We will kill and slaughter you. He says, I would rather die on haqq with Hussein than to be amongst you and to kill Hussein and end up in the fires of hell. I call you to come towards the path of Hussein. They say, we will kill you the same way we will kill Hussein. He says, let it be the case. He goes out and fights them bravely. He is surrounded. They strike him on all parts of his body. Har falls towards the floor. He calls out, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Oh Abu Abdullah, accept my salutation. Imam al-Hussein runs towards Har. He sits down beside him. He sees that there is a wound coming from his head, bleeding over the face. He wipes the face of Har clean. He takes off his own bandage and covers it upon the wound of Har. Har is now bleeding to death, his broken body torn into pieces. He looks at him and says, oh Abu Abdullah, have I fulfilled my responsibilities to you? Tell me again, have you forgiven me for what I have done? Imam says to him, not only have I forgiven you, O Har, but you are as your mother has named you. You are truly an embodiment of Har, of the one who is being free. Leave this world and go towards paradise. It is said that many years ago, when water was entering into the grave of Har, Har came into the dream of the ulama. He wanted for them to take the water out. As they came to dig up the body of Har, the alim said that that bandage was still over his forehead. When he slightly lifted it, the blood continued to pour from the body, from the forehead of Har, because his body was still fresh until today. This is what happens when you become shaheed in the way of Hussein ibn Ali. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين فَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيُّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Please raise your hands and join each other in dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before his coming, raise us from our graves so that we may partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask for Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times, those people in a state of war, oppression, poverty, homelessness, disease and disaster. Ya Allah, grant them more safety, security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, help us to help those people who are in need. We ask you, Ya Allah, help us to understand Islah and in the final moments of our life we die in the love of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Granted the ziyarah of Hussein fi dunya wal akhirah. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In honor of her, please recite one loud salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.